You can go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Vince Weaver, and I'll be talking today about Apple II Myst Demake. And I'm a associate professor at the University of Maine. That's my background. And the picture there is, I like to show off scenes from Maine to try to convince people to come here. That's Little Niagara Falls in Baxter State Park, which is right near Mount Katahdin, the start of the Appalachian Trail in northern Maine. So about me, as I said, I'm a professor. My research usually is in high performance computing, computer architecture, and embedded systems. So I work with some of the biggest computers, and I work with some of the smallest computers. I like making things with blinky LED lights. You see some examples there at the bottom. And recently, I've been doing a lot of things with Apple II games and demo scene. I'm in a demo scene. I saw my name Deater there. It's my demo scene thing handle if you want to look it up. Sadly, it's a little hard to get to research university doing retro gaming, but maybe that will change. So I think I'm doing the side. So one thing I always like to say when I do these things is, are there any Maine connections to this type of work? And it turns out there is. The designer of the 6502 processor found in the Apple II is a guy by the name Chuck Peddle, and he went to the University of Maine. That's a picture of him. Sadly, he died not that long ago, but I got to meet him briefly. You might as well say, is there any Myst connections with University of Maine? Not that I know of, though. I did get to meet Chuck Carter briefly when he came and gave a talk there. And at the time, possibly still, he lives right around, his office is right around the corner from my house. So it's sort of a small world. So Apple II Demake. So Demake is when you take an older computer and you try to run a newer game on it. So you take a game and then sort of backport it to older computers. And that's sort of a thing. For some reason, I started doing this. I don't know why. So you can see there's some examples, Out of This World, Another World. There's one little bit of Kerbal Space Program, Portal, Duke Nukem 1, Monkey Island, sort of Final Fantasy clone and stuff like this. I tried them out. Some of these are just brief proof of concept type demos. So Another World, Out of This World is actually mostly playable. The other ones are playable, just you can't play the full games. So while working on my Another World Demake, somehow I got the thought in my head is maybe these graphics and converting, wonder what Myst would look like in that. I forget how it even came up. So I started doing it. And so this is about my Myst Demake. And, other times I give talks like this, sometimes I have to explain what Myst is, as it's not a problem for this audience. But again, it's point and click, pre-render graphics, originally for the Mac, 256 colors of HyperCard, millions of copies sold. Important thing is, it was an early CD-ROM game. So the data files are huge, 500 plus megabytes. So the question is, how can you take something like that and put it on an Apple II where the disk size is 140 kilobytes, orders of magnitude smaller. So Myst, I am a fan of Myst from way back. I was actually going through and actually found when I played it the other day, and this is for something unrelated. I didn't look this up for this talk. There was something going around the internet about, what music do you listen to playing a game? And I remember when we played Myst with my friend of mine, I used to go to his house and play it after he got it for Christmas. We listened to a They Might Be Giants album. He got it roughly the same time. And since I'm old, I was trying to figure out which album it was by looking up the date of things. So I dug in these journals. My journals aren't as exciting as Atrus's. They're actually from high school and sort of very cringeworthy. But you can see my review there in 1994. I played Myst, cool game. And then in April 1995, I said I played a cool text adventure. That's a side story. It's actually the first time I used Linux. My friend installed it. We're playing Battlestar on Linux. But we found the beat Myst. And so I enjoyed it. I was surprised I didn't have more to say about this here because actually it was a very frustrating experience. We got stuck on piano puzzle like many people did for a long time. His sister was a better musical ear than us, had to help. The big things, we got to the end and tried to finish it and it didn't work. And spoiler alert, at the end, you're supposed to flip switches a certain way. We did it, it didn't work. So we were stuck. And then we were in a Best Buy. This is back before the days of the internet. We could look these things up. And it was like, hey, let's look at the strategy guide, and looked at it. And it said, in very certain copies of the game, it's reversed. The directions tell you to flip the switches one way, you're supposed to do the other. There's a bug in the game. And it turns out we had one of these buggy copies. And sure enough, we went back and did it. We finally beat the game. And then the ending, I was sort of disappointed in the ending. I was expecting something bigger. And to this day, it's been sort of a little sarcastic about this. So if you ever seen my demakes, sometimes there's a little bit of sarcasm among them. It's mostly because, and I'm not annoyed at the game as much as Atrus himself. I sometimes feel like he always asks a lot and doesn't always do much in return, it seems. But I do like the game. I've played all the games, all the follow-ups. We finally even played with my family. We finally beat Abduction not that long ago. So, so I've done a lot of playing of Myst games. So back to the question, how do you fit the big CD-ROM game on a 5 1/4-inch floppy disk if you've never seen one? On the Apple II, these hold 140 kilobytes per side, so not very much. I originally wanted to fit it in one. Eventually, it ended up taking 3. And to do that. But first, one thing I want to ask is, a very pressing question, is what 8-bit computer would Atrus use if you had to, think about it? And so, there's a lot of options. I'd like to think he'd use an Apple II, though online recently, someone actually put up a convincing argument that the Dunning numbering system looked like something you'd find on a Commodore 64 PET-SCI. That's besides the point. So here's a picture of the early Apple founder, Cirrus Nakinar, or at least I think they could probably pass the Cirrus Nakinar if they were cosplaying or something, but that's Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. And so Steve Wozniak is a very, I feel like, Atrus-like character. The Apple II is designed in a very complex way. He was very clever with his design, used the minimum amount of parts. And so programming ends up being almost like a puzzle. Just trying to get things to happen is like solving this really complicated puzzle to get things to work, more so in some ways than other processes and all that. So just briefly, on the Apple II, if you've never heard of it, Apple II is one of the original personal computers released in 1977. It was one of the earliest ones, and it is the earliest one that actually had a color display. Commodore people try to tell you the Commodore PET came out earlier. It's sort of complicated. You could actually pay money for a Commodore PET earlier, but it is more of a pre-order, and the Apple II shipped earlier. But people like that big arguments about this. So there's a 1 megahertz 6502 processor in it. This is an 8-bit processor. If you've ever done programming on processors at the assembly language level, the 6502 only has 3 registers, A, X, and Y. They're 8 bits, which means that you can only fit the numbers 0 to 255 with them. Anything you do bigger, you need to use more complicated stuff, so very limited. The original system you can get from 4K to 48K of RAM. That's kilobytes, that's not megabytes, that's not gigabytes, kilobytes. And the original one is made out of discrete 7400 series logic, so just basic gates, which is nice. Other systems at the time used more complicated graphics chips and stuff like that, and you can't get those chips replaced anymore, whereas the 7400 chips are sort of basic building blocks, and so you can actually fix your Apple II. Originally, you stored things in cassette tape, which was very slow and not very convenient. It just had a simple speaker, no fancy sound chips. Very limited modes, graphics modes, but at the time they were sort of nice. It had a 40 by 24 text mode, a 40 by 48 15 color low res mode, which you'll notice is the one I used for Myst. It has 140 by 192 6 color high res mode, and you needed a lot of RAM for graphics, and it had integer basic and ROM that you booted up. Apple didn't stand still though. They released some recent, newer systems. The Apple II Plus came out in 1979. This had 48K RAM sort of standard, and the big deal was it had a floppy drive. And not all systems had floppy drives, so Apple II was nice in this way. Things like the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64, people are often stuck much longer with floppy drives. I had a newer version of BASIC, a Microsoft BASIC called Applesoft and ROM. They kept coming with releases. Apple IIe in 1983. This one, you can actually get lowercase characters. In the Apple II Plus, you can only get uppercase characters. Up to 64K of RAM, 80 columns display instead of 40 columns. You can even get 128K, and you can get fancier graphics modes. We'll talk briefly later. The IIe Enhanced or Platinum, and you can't see, yes, the machine I'll be running on later here, had a 6502 processor in it, which is slightly fancier. Had some mouse text, which are fancier graphics characters. There was an Apple IIc, and people wondering where Apple gets their crazy naming scheme, where everything's a 2C plus and all that kind of stuff. It goes back to the very beginning. The Apple IIc came out in 1984, sort of a portable machine. Not really a laptop, you had to sort of lug it around, but it was more portable than the other ones. There actually was later 2C plus, an accelerator to make things run faster. And finally, the last sort of Apple II before they abandoned it and they shut it down for the Macs was the Apple II GS, with the G and S standing for graphics and sound. And this is actually a 16-bit computer. It's much faster, had a 16-bit processor, had a lot more RAM, had much fancier graphics, had fancier sound. That's made by the same person who made the Commodore 64 SID sound chip, so it was a lot fancier. So these are all compatible. So you write things for one, it'll run on all of them. And so the Myst Demake I designed to run on the 2 Plus, the older one from 1979, just because it's fun, it's older and all that. It assumes you have a disk drive. It assumes at least 48K of RAM. If you want to get sound effects, you need to have at least 64K of RAM. And I'll get to that later. There's an optional board you can get called a Mockingboard for music. So you can get some music too. And the system was possible in 1979. The last trick is because the Mockingboard itself didn't come out till the 80s. It would have cost about $1,200 for the system and $500 for the disk drive back then, which, adjusting for inflation, is like $5,000, which probably seems like a huge amount of money. But back then, it was hard to get systems. So the status of Demake, it is actually fully playable now, from the intro to all the various endings. All the puzzles are there and playable. Many of the animations are there, not quite all of them, but as many as I could fit. Sounds troublesome because, again, it takes a lot of RAM for sound. So a lot of the sound was converted to text. And you can play it actually without having sound. And so people were joking when we first released this. It was the first version of Myst that was completely accessible that way. I know since then the newer versions have fixed this, but it had subtitles for everything. And there are some space savers. I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but every other step in the game as you're going through it is sort of left out just to save room. And even in the end, originally when I gave this talk, I wasn't going to implement the Sonetic submaze because I find that tedious sometimes, but in the end I implemented it. So it's there, you can play that if you'd like. So the game engine, it's a fairly simple, it fits in only 4 kilobytes. And I wrote from scratch. I did not reverse engineer the code or actually look at the code at all. I just based it entirely on playthroughs I've done and just how, playing through the game and seeing how it reacts. And it was written entirely in 6502 assembly language. So at the lowest level, talking to the computer, like lower than C, lower than in languages. It's talking directly one step above machine language. The machine talks. So let's briefly go through this. If you want more technical details on this, I gave a talk at the Kansas Fest Apple II conference last year where I go into much more details about things. If you can look that up on YouTube, I have a link at the end if you're interested in that. But every frame, it copies the background from an off-screen where it loaded the graphics to the current off-screen display. It draws foreground items and animations. It draws the hand cursor. It has special cases if you're at the edges or if you're over an object, that'll change that. It'll do page flips. So the Apple II, that's the only nice feature it has. It can do hardware page flips. So it'll flip from off screen to on screen to avoid tearing and all that. It'll trick the keyboard with the cursor. And if you click, it'll change your location. And that's all it really is. Myst is not a very complicated game. So it was fairly easy to implement. And it's a series of connected rooms. So this is actually what the code looks like for, there's a bunch of these for each sort of room or area you are in the game. And so there's 4 exits to the other rooms. When you exit the room, which direction you go into, because sometimes you sort of turn a corner and you exit a room, the backgrounds, graphics, it points to those, and then it has a special exit. So if you click on an object, it has the coordinates on the screen where the object is, and you click on it, and then it has a helper routine that callback that it's called to run it. And this is tricky because it means that you can only have sort of one clickable object or thing on the screen. And in some cases in the game, especially near the marker switcher and from the generator, there's actually multiple things you want to be able to click on. So that gets a little tricky sometimes. Other things that break the engine, rooms have more than 4 exits or views. So the library is one, it's got 8 things you can look at. Channel mode is a nightmare for other reasons too, but the little pentagon platforms you're in, you can look like 5 different ways or whatever, and that just makes it more difficult too. Other things with the game is making the complex puzzles and mixing text. This is a 40 by 48 graphics mode. You couldn't put text on top of the graphics, but you can cheat. On the Apple II, you can flip in the bottom 4 lines of text. So you can play games here where you're actually putting the text here and having part of the puzzle. And you can make inverse text in the Apple II. So these white here isn't actually graphics. It's actually inverse spaces to make it look like it's part of the graphics. And this is one of these clever Apple II tricks that Apple II people be impressed by, and everyone else is like, I can't tell. So getting input when you're doing this, it's exciting. It's a challenge in the Apple II. There's actually no up or down keys on the Apple II Plus. So I do WASD keys too. There's no key up event. So when you press a key, you get the key down event, but you never can tell what it is. And that's a problem. Some of the puzzles, like the gear puzzle in the clock tower, things happen if you hold it down longer, and you actually can't do that. I had to implement the puzzle slightly differently. Clicking different parts of the handle do things differently. That was the workaround I came up with. But that makes it tricky. The newer Apple IIs, you can do this, but the older ones, you can't. It does have joystick support, so you can get a joystick and play it. It turns out in practice, it's not very fun because it's actually really hard to do fine mouse movement type things fit. The later Apple IIs did have a mouse. You might say it does have mouse support, and it turns out it doesn't. The mouse is a late addition to the Apple II. It actually conflicts with the Mockingbird music card. It's not really suited for low res, and most of all, I don't have a mouse to test with, so I couldn't really test it. Sound, so Myst has a lot of atmospheric sound. It's really nice, but unfortunately, it's hard to do in Apple II. Digital sounds are too large. If you had the language card, which was a 16K expansion for the Apple II, or if you had an Apple IIe that had 64K of RAM, you do get sound. And the only sound I can fit in there is the linking noise. So that's the one used most importantly in the book, in the game, I thought. So you click on a book, you'll get the linking noise. It's 12K. So it's taking roughly 1/4 of your entire amount of RAM just to play that linking noise. I also at one point had the Bring Me the Red Page sound effect fairly squeezed into 4K, but I ran out of room on disk, so it's not there anymore. And there's some info there that Oliver Schmidt wrote the sound playing code. And there's also other things. There's clicks and tones. You can actually play the piano in the Rocket and it'll play, you can actually play the piano, but it's doing raw tones there, nothing else. And as I mentioned earlier, for the complex effects and for the voiceovers, it actually uses text at the bottom. And uppercase text, it turns out you can make a lowercase text on the newer ones, and actually adding that's not very, doesn't take very many bytes. I found out that the game, I feel like, plays better because Atrus always sounds urgent when he's talking and everyone, so it's too conversational and too friendly when it's lowercase. So I left everything in uppercase. Music, it plays the theme during the intro. So it uses the Mockingbird card, which is an A3, 8, 9, 10 sound chips, which gives you 3 square waves. And Apple II actually got 2 of those chips. And I converted this theme from the MIDI file sort of by hand using the PT3 format, which is a tracker format used in the ZX Spectrum community and all that. And so it plays in the background using interrupts if it detects you have such a card. So the art, there's over 800 background images here. So in the game, just playing through like that, there's about 800 different backgrounds. And I draw all these by hand. And this is what the most time-consuming thing is. And so you might ask, how did you do that? And so I cheated a bit. What I would do is take screenshots from the game and then sort of trace over them. And if you're really interested, people asked about this. I actually posted a video of my workflow if you want to look at it. And it's mostly just me taking the image and then tracing over it and then doing that. And but yeah, that's the most time-consuming part of it. And it's also the biggest question I get is why not use better graphics? I'm using the low-res graphics mode, 40 by 48. It turns out I like low-res graphics mode, and it turns out I'm possibly the only person in the world who likes low-res graphics mode. I get a lot of complaints on this. But I had a lot of existing codes for existing animating and sprites and moving things. And I wanted to run a 2+ and minimal disk accesses. You get pulled out of the game if you have to wait for a very long disk access. So fit as much into RAM as possible. 40 by 48 screens 1 kilobyte, and so you can fit a decent amount in RAM when compressed, whereas the bigger ones we'll see, you really can't. So the low-res graphics, the 40 by 48, they're not square. You get 15 colors you see down here. Some of them pretty horrific, especially this aqua color. I do use it, but it's sort of on an actual CRT at the time was sort of a shockingly aqua color. There's 2 colors, say why not 16 powers of 2? The 2 grays are the same on the older Apple IIs. They changed that on the 2GS, but it's because Apple II doesn't really have colors. What it does is it sends 1s and 0s really fast, and it tricks the old NTSC TVs into seeing color. And so the one gray is 1010, and the other one 0101, and those look the same. But if you put them next to each other, though, if you get 2 0s or 2 1s next to each other, you can get actually artifacting. And so this picture over here is from a demo I made. And you can see that there's like a 1 pixel wide line here. And so if you're clever, if you're used to the 2 gray colors, you can actually get lines like in these columns and stuff. So it's another obscure Apple II trick you can do. I mentioned you can switch 4 rows of text in the bottom there and has hardware page flipping, no other acceleration. So other machines you might have heard of like Atari 800 and the Commodore 64 have hardware sprites, hardware scrolling, all kinds of fancy graphics mode. None of that on the Apple II. Low res is mildly hard to program. It's interleaved weird in memory. The addresses aren't just a simple bitmap of 1K. It's all mixed up because it saved Steve Wozniak a gate or 2 and made RAM refresh better. You also get 2 pixels per byte, top and bottom in each byte, and that's sort of a pain too. I cheat in a few places, like all the sprites I have aligned in 2s because it just made the code easier. And so I did some graphics comparisons to see what things are like. This is just saying I captured them with the emulator and just some things about that. So low res, you might say, well, why not just take the graphics from the game and run it through an automatic conversion utility? Why sit there and trace them all? And you can see if you do that, the results aren't really that great. Automatic tools don't do a great job. They look sort of okay. It looks actually okay in a small screen. When you play in a bigger screen, it looks a little chunkier and all that. And so it tries, but automated doesn't always work the best. For things, sometimes it's important to tell where a puzzle is or see something in the background, know what it is. And someone drawing the graphics by hand could take that into account. So when I hand draw things, you see things do that. It make things stand out. You can see the puzzles more clearly. Sometimes it was trouble though. So Solenic Age, I had endless trouble because of the colors. The colors just did not map well to the Apple II colors. And so that one's one of the ones that's a little harder to play. If you had Apple IIe with lots of RAM, you got double low res, which is 80 by 48 colors. And that gets a little bit better with the automatic conversions. It looks a little bit better, but it's way more complicated to code. If you thought it didn't really think how it was bad, now it's in 2 bank switch memory. It gets really complicated. So at high res, we said there's high res graphics on this machine, 280 by 192, 6 colors. And you can see that doesn't look too bad. So why not use this mode? So people always ask me, why don't you use it? And it turns out there are challenges. It's much bigger. It takes 8 kilobytes versus 1 kilobyte of the low res. So it's 8 times as big. So in theory, if you just did a direct conversion, instead of 3 disks for the game, you need 24. And that's just, crazy. And if you went 2 pages, that's 16K. And that's most of the RAM you have. And you can only fit maybe up to 8 pictures in RAM before you run out. And so you have to constantly go to disk or just not fit. And the automatic conversions of all the dithering looks nice, but it doesn't compress well. There's also ridiculous constraints. It's got even crazier interleaving than low res. You get 6 colors, but you only get 3.5 pixels per byte. So you have to divide by 7, which is really hard on a 6502. You get weird edge fringing. You get 6 colors, but you actually have 8, but you get black and white twice. And that's because the high bit on each group of 3.5 pixels says whether to use the green and purple or the orange and blue. And you can't mix those and those things or else weird things happen. Also, orange and blue, if you're drawing vertical lines, it's one column or another. And if you're not careful and you try to draw in the wrong column, you just get black or white, and you get things touch each other. With the zeros and ones, you get black and white interfacing and stuff. It is a really challenging graphics mode to use, and it's much more of a hassle. So how did 1980s people manage if that's all they had to do? And so they often use vector graphics, not bitmap. So things like AGI and things like the early Sierra games. So these examples from Wizard into Princess, which was a game from Sierra. And so what they did was they just draw, points and lines, connect them up, and then sort of flood fill. And then in the bottom, you'd have your text and you'd navigate, and you'd actually see this being drawn as you watch. So I sort of got off track. Originally my talk would not go here, but I sort of implemented high res the last week or two just because it came up at first. There's an Applesoft BASIC bot on Twitter where you can tweet at it with BASIC program, and it will actually run it and send you the results. And so this program I wrote that barely fits in a tweet, and it will draw this down here, this scene here from Myst. And I was just trying to test out rectangle drawing utility. And then I saw that and I'm like, well, maybe I posted that and everyone got excited about it. So I'm like, well, maybe I can draw a better vector library, one that does circles and squares and all that. And so I posted this sort of AGI-like thing where it has this really sarcastic text parser, and you can go to a few scenes in Myst. And then, things spiraled out of control. So I was looking on this. So I made a port, it's called VGI for, Vince's graphics interface or something. And so it has some primitives like circles, triangles, lines, and points. There's some trouble as the resolution is 280, but you can only do 255 in 8-bit. So you go off the edge of the screen to the right, left, not left, right, everything gets tricky. I actually had to speed up accelerate routines for horizontal filling of lines because the default ones was way too slow. And so you can make things a lot faster. It is, if you see it, it draws things sort of slow. You can speed it up. The problem is the speed versus code size trade-off. For example, clearing the screen's a little slow, and you can make an accelerated version of that. The problem is using the firmware ROM one like I use uses 5 bytes of code. So if you write an accelerated, unrolled lookup table-based one, it's a couple 100 bytes. And so it's a 20-time size increase. And is that worth it for a 2 times improvement of speed? Maybe, but then again, your game, it's a trade-off, constant trade-off between size and speed and everything. So I looked into it, unscientific, but the ones I did, the graphics end up being about twice as big as low res. So maybe you could fit it in 5 disks, maybe Riven-like or 1H per disk. The graphics are slow to draw, and walking around's okay. I took my existing game engine for low res and just swapped out the routines. I had to move everything around because it didn't fit. And suddenly there's 8K of graphics RAM in the middle and everything. The puzzles and animations would be a challenge, though, especially sprites. The sprites, even just the hand pointer and stuff, is like twice as big. And so just fitting everything. But here's an example. There's the original. There's what the dithered, automatic conversion is. And this is what the version I hand drew looks like. And here's some other examples of hand drew scenes. And these take a long time. If you thought the low res stuff I did took forever, this takes even longer. So, but it does definitely look nicer. So, maybe if I have infinite time sometime, I'll, work some more on it. Back to the graphics comparison, double high res. So again, if you have a lot of RAM in your system, you can get this fancier 280 by 192 mode, but you need 128K. The graphics are even bigger, 16 kilobytes each, but you're getting a lot closer to what the game looked like. Again, it's even more complicated than high res. Most people don't even bother with this until recently because people there's been a resurgence in using this mode. But again, it's really complicated bank switching. The colors are reversed every other line. It's a huge nightmare. Super high res in Apple IIGS is even bigger, but it looks really nice. So you might say make an Apple IIGS version. This isn't really sort of that interesting though, because it was contemporary with things around the time this came out. Systems similar like the Amiga and stuff, I think got Myst ports, official Myst ports that were that much more powerful than the Apple IIGS. A few other things, fitting things on disk. How do you make things fit better? Compression, using the low res stuff, skipping parts of the game. I mentioned some of this stuff already. Simplify some corner cases of the game. Other ways to get smaller, simple graphics, generate backgrounds, maybe algorithmically, the pillar area where you're doing the one puzzle, where you're touching the shapes, they're very similar. You can maybe code that in hardware instead of having images, not hardware and software. Trees and channel wood, I had to draw so many trees, maybe if you had some sort of primitive for drawing trees. Some things in the game are mirror images, especially in Stone Ship. I actually looked into them just mirroring, having a flag that's a mirror the thing, but it turns out having the mirroring code was enough extra. It didn't make up much difference for the extra images. Fitting more in disks, you can have custom bootloaders. Back in the day, people fancy things. I said the disk 140K, people like Gus Stephenson back in the 80s for print shop and all that, he managed to fit 157K in disk by hardly abusing the disk format and all that. You do things like that. Compression, I compressed the images of LZSA2, a compression library by Manuel Marti, and Cucumba, another hacker, he helped a bit. And so these are all the pictures and all the various parts of the game. 1 kilobyte would be the maximum size. And so you can see things compress actually nicely, about a third of the original size. And without compression, there'd be no way to fit it on the disks. Disk I/O, so I could go on and about Disk I/O. I won't go in here. I actually gave a really nice talk specifically in Disk I/O and the Demake at the Demo Splash 2020 demo party in Pittsburgh this past year, and nobody recorded it, or the recordings are lost. I'm very sad about it because it was a really nice talk. But it turns out if you get rid of the operating system, there's a very simple operating system called DOS 3.3. It's unrelated to Microsoft DOS for Apple that you can use, but we just bypassed it all. We have a bootloader, and the bootloader knows enough to load Myst off the raw tracks in the disk, and so just bypass everything and things fit a lot. And so that's how everything fits. It has load and save games. You get 5 game states. And it's straightforward because it turns out that Myst doesn't have a lot of game state. It's 74 bytes is all it takes to remember the entire state of your game. And so, you can have the load and save, and it doesn't take very much space to add that. Layout on disk, people like this. I keep meaning to make an actual plot of this, but instead you get the graph paper one. But this is what the disk is like. Disk 1 has the title, the boot sector. It's got the title screen. It's got Myst itself. I have funny names for all the rooms here at the time, including Myst. I was unclear how Cyan would like me making this at first. So I was being cautious, with funny names and all that, but turned out it wasn't a problem. Octagon is the libraries here, the dentist, that's the observatory here, Dunny is here, the ship on the Myst Island part of the ship, the viewer room, the generator, they're all on the first disk. Disk 2 is entirely channel wood because channel wood is such a pain. It's got channel wood, it's got the second story of channel wood, the third story of channel wood, and the cabin to get into it. And disk 3 is mechanical age, stone ship, the selenetic age, and the annoying sub puzzle, and they fit on 3 disks. And it saves a little bit of extra room here. And the way the disk is, that's why I have a diagram here. I didn't manually lay this out and get it set. If you're wondering how I develop it, I develop in Linux. The graphics I do in the GIMP, it's not the best tool for it. It's definitely not the best tool for it. I'm just sort of used to it. I use a CA65 assembler from the CC65 project, and I cross-assemble from Linux. I edit the Nano text editor. I test everything on the Apple Win emulator on Linux. I do everything on Linux using Wine on Linux. And I do all the testing there. And then when I'm done, I can copy it to my Apple IIe. If I have a device with a USB card, I can put it in an Apple II and copy files around and get it that way. So I also received, this amazing thing. Did everyone love it? I'm actually only aware of one person who's played through it the whole way. I'm sure more people have. The person who played through it was a great job. They actually gave lots of useful feedback and opened some bug reports and fixed them. It turns out most Apple II people are not really Myst fans. I'm sort of disappointed by this, but they tend to be slightly older than me, Gen X type. And, they weren't that enthused. They're mostly excited these days in the games they played in their youth or versions, remakes of things like that. So Nux Arceus is a big one that came out recently. It's a lot like a clone of the Ultima games. Even if you follow the 8-bit guy on YouTube, he released a game called Attack of the Petsky Robots. This one's fun because the music code on there, I have an autographed copy because the music code it uses is actually my music code that got used in it. But he made a version for the Apple II and tried to sell it, and no one was buying it. So it's sort of unfortunate. Commodore 64 and other groups, they have a lot of interest in their old games and people making new games. Apple II, unfortunately, it is not as much, I've found. But so future work, the low res is done. I might do more work on the high res version. Again, it takes forever. And as a joke, I just did this last night as a joke. I don't really have Riven put together, but I put together some graphics of what Riven might look like. just for fun, but I'm not doing Riven. And the thing is, I say things like this and then I do, but this time I'm pretty sure I'm not. The Riven is possibly my favorite of the series. So you might be asking, how can I play this amazing thing? So it's not for sale for obvious reasons. I did make a limited run where I make copies on floppy by hand, which was a bit tedious. And most of those currently are in the Cyan Vault. I sent them in and they have them. Disk images, you can download them on my website. If you have real hardware, you can make disk images. The process for doing that's a little complicated, but you can do it and play it. You can also run an emulator. I use Apple Win and it works fine. And it's sort of reasonably easy to learn if you got Windows. There's other ones. It's a little easier in a browser. They're browser ones. So this JavaScript one, you can run in a browser and then point it to the disk images and play, and it works. I actually uploaded a copy of the Internet Archive, which is even easier. You can just click on the archive and play it. The problem is they only can load one disk at a time, so you're limited to Myst Island. If you try to leave Myst Island, it won't sort of let you. And some closing things to really know a game, re-implement in 6502 assembly, especially out of this world. And this one, it's amazing the things you learn, the little animations, little details you learn by re-implementing things. Writing a game is sort of like Myst. You're taking this arcane language and writing in this window and then pressing a button and then magically the game world appears. It's very much like I feel like Atrus must feel like when he's writing his blinking books and all that. And working this game is different than a lot of other ones I've done. It's very weird. I kept feeling pressed to finish these things because I kept imagining the stranger coming and like walking through it and then getting stuck because I didn't implement the rest of the game or the puzzle, and then being stuck forever, sort of Myst Exile like. And so that's why I sort of pressed through with this game, is I wanted to make it so you didn't get stuck in it. So questions, I'll take questions a little bit. One thing I'm gonna do, I still have a little bit of time here, is I actually have my Apple II hooked up, and if it works, I'm going to try to play the Apple II through here if it works. So hopefully that's working. So that's the Apple II. I'm going to boot out the floppy disk. I'm booting off slot 5. If you ever use an Apple II, you might say the slot 6 is where the floppy drive usually is, but it is, I have my USB thing in slot 6, so slot 5's here, so Myst. And, it does the whole intro. At least see the whole intro here. Skip through parts of it here, but all this in low res. The pointer is a little big here. Again, it's one of the compromises you have to make for low res is this. I made all the animations here. And that's load from disk. And sorry if I'm having, like I didn't test this earlier, Zoom is mirroring the image for me. Hopefully it's not mirroring it for you, but it means my pointers are acting a bit odd here. But I had to play this backwards. You can flip the marker switches and stuff. You can, go places. I meant to go back and you can click on the letter. So it's switch to text mode here. So some of these things in text mode. Text mode and graphics mode on the Apple II are the same. So the pointer, I was just lazy, and so it uses the same sprite libraries, even though it looks a little silly like that. So you go to places. Let's see. I sort of had a route planned out here. If anyone has somewhere they'd really like to see, I can take you there. I was going to take you into this here, and I just realized I forgot to turn off the light. So let's go. Turn off the light. But implement a lot of these things, so you can go to the you know, all the controls work. You can go and press the button. It actually go, and you can actually, if you put in the correct dates, it will actually, you know, give you a hopefully a reasonably believable constellation. Let's go in the library real quick. So disk routines are pretty fast. The ones Cucumber gave, they actually can roll pretty fast. Okay, Selenetic. Yep, I can get you there. Let me just try a few things first. So, you know, no, it's already open, isn't it? You can, well, let's go look at the linking book. You can pick up the pages. You can put them in. You can go say hi. You can do the tower rotation and everything. You can go in the fireplace. Press some buttons. You can see, I told you you can use the weird things to get sub-pixel stuff here. If you're excited about this, I'll hopefully, if all goes well, I'll be doing a speed run tomorrow so you can see the whole thing here. Okay, so people want to go to Selenetic. That's the one of the worst graphics, but I guess we can. Let me check my time now. We're doing okay in time so far. I was going to look at the books in the bookshelf first. So I said sometimes in these games I get a little more sarcastic and all that, but actually to remove it for gameplay reasons. But some of these books here, if you read them, you know, they have Atrus still being, I forget which ones you can pick up, being a little silly in his writing here. But you go here and it has all the clues you need for doing things. The combinations, it actually has them. And it was interesting hearing the talk earlier about, you know, this randomly generated by an algorithm in the actual game, because that's sort of how I did it here too. The only one that's set is the one that's actual. You also notice that it's actually one row and one column shorter on the, just because I couldn't fit in the graphics. So it's actually a slightly easier puzzle to solve in here. So. So it's running from disk, as I said, you know, things are different on different floppies, and so far we haven't changed them. The problem with the speed run is the all the channel wood is on disk 2, including the cabin, and so you have to change disks, which makes it sort of interesting. Actually, I don't want that. It's an interesting problem playing this mirror image. I should figure out how to change it, but let's go look at the generator real quick. Okay. Okay, let's go to the spaceship. Wrong way. And it is asking for floppy. This is when I have to change the floppies. And so as I said before, you can actually play the piano. But we want to go and just so people don't think I'm a total expert at this, I do have a cheat sheet I made here earlier. So and here we are. It's not quite as cloudy. As I said, this is the one that had the hardest problem with all the colors and such. But you can definitely go here and you can turn on the things. It tells you the sound effects. I said, don't have room for all the sounds, so it's doing the subtitles. And we can go down the ladder here. And let me turn on the light. The biggest complaint people have is, unless you haven't played Myst before, it's really hard to tell some of these graphics. That is true. It is hard. That's why the high res one, I think people would probably play more. Again, it's just a lot of trouble. But yeah, you come here and you can go and you can, adjust. I had the one turned on. I forget. I played this so much when I was developing it, a little bit ago. Like it was about a year ago. Then it took a gap for a little bit, and so like I used to be able to just zip through this just because I do it all the testing. Now I probably have to click the thing down here. I forget which one it is. So, but there's that. Does anyone want to see another one, or do you want me to take questions? I'll be glad to do either. I actually can load the save game, so I don't have to go and solve the puzzle. I can warp to one of them if anyone wants to see a certain one. Oops, always pressing. The problem with having. So how to get the link sound so high quality? So that was, as I said, it's surprising. 1-bit speaker, you wouldn't think you'd be able to use like a bit bang speaker. It wouldn't be that hard, but people have done this for the Apple II. They've written libraries for the sound libraries for doing this, and there's a utility you can get, and you just take the sound and you put it, I guess, in Audacity and get to certain parameters and put it in, and it will do it, and it actually sounds different. It sounds good. So again, it's again, it mostly wasn't me. It was people in the community who did this and did it. Do I prefer to be the only one or do everything myself? I enjoy doing everything myself. As you can tell, graphics are not my super strongest point. I'm okay. I actually used to be an ANSI art artist back in the old days. So 40 by 40, I can sort of handle. It might be nice to have someone help with the graphics. And music. I always can get help with music. That's why I sort of joined a demo group and all that. But it is tough. It's hard to see how people in the old days, how they used to do everything themselves. So I'm not against teaming up. And if anyone out there is good at doing graphics, you can drop me a line and we can see. I'm not sure why it's not loading here. Why am I wearing goggles? So that is an interesting question. So these are sort of my Atrus goggles that I wear when I give Myst talks. And you guys are the first to ask me about that. I've given at least 3 other talks and no one's asked me about the goggles. I just feel like, I don't know, it makes me feel like Myst is happening here. Anybody keep asking questions? I just briefly in Channelwood here, not Channelwood, Stone Chip, I mean. So. Okay, good. Part of the thing is blocking my screen too, so I was also swapping discs blind there because I couldn't see what was going on. But yeah, it's all playable. We can go, I don't know if I'll have time, but we can try going down and doing the puzzle here. I feel like a trunk is one of those things that actually turned out sort of nicely in low res graphics here. So let the water out. Probably take another question if there is one. I'm sort of coordinated enough to play this and talk at the same time. How complicated is it versus 8086? I've actually programmed a lot of assembly language in my time, mostly 8086 ARM, but I actually enjoy 6502 the most. It is a lot more restrictive. There's a lot fewer ways to do things than say 8086, but it makes it nicer. When there's only like a couple ways to do things, it makes it a lot easier to, you know, when you're optimizing, when there's only one way to do things is a lot better than 8086 when there's 50 ways to do things and one's really the best and all that. You sort of have to get used to it. It's sort of a different mindset, though. You have to think a very certain way. And after a while, Apple II was my first computer, nostalgia-wise. That's why I use the Apple II. And so in my mind, that's sort of exactly how computers are supposed to work, is how the Apple II works. So a lot of the weird quirks it has, I'm just sort of, you know, used to them. So I'm a lot more forgiving than you might be if you were used to 8086 and wanted to, you know, learn it from scratch. But yeah, you just get X and Y register the flags. There's some bugs, but it's a nice, you know, it's a nice processor, I think. That's not what to do. I want to turn around. There we go. Any other questions? Also, let me know if I, you know, if we're done for time. I'm just, you know, running around here now. Let me go look at the telescope if I get a chance here. Again, I'm playing this mirror reversed, which is an interesting challenge in and of itself. I want to walk. How long did it take to make? That's a good one. So I started in March last year and I finished it up roughly in September-ish. And you might say, how did you have so much time for this? Aren't you a professor with lots of stuff going on? And I am. I was actually, you know, as a professor, you get a sabbatical every couple of years. And I made the bad choice of planning a lot of travel and sabbatical. I'll keep this wrong. Right when COVID hit. So I suddenly had a lot of unexpected free time. So that was part of it. I also find doing this sort of soothing. Assembly language, it might seem weird, but 6502 assembly language and Apple II program I find very sort of soothing. So during stressful times, it was sort of a nice project to work on. And the graphics itself, you know, it doesn't take a lot of thinking. It's a lot of just sort of doing art. And, you know, I sort of enjoyed doing it. Let's see, do I have it drained? No, it's not drained. Where's the platform? I'm trying to think if I have any other. It's taken a lot of work for Apple II running. Apple II are fairly resilient machines. The one I'm running on it now is, you know, it's a 2E Platinum. It's about 35 years old. And it has not given me a problem. I got it at a school. My dad was a teacher at a school and they were throwing it out and I just kept it and it's worked great. I have another one at work, a 2+ that I also test on. And it had some broken chips, but they're very easy to replace. And I fixed it myself. I put a new power supply in it because the power supply, the capacitors go bad and all that. but that's about it. They're very easy to fix and very resilient machines. I feel like a lot more than modern systems. So you can see the rooms here. You know, some of the furniture here was really difficult to do. Let's go look at the other room too. How does the maze runner work? So in Selenetic, it's a lot like the thing. I mean, the whole map is there. Instead of getting the sound effects, though, it's actually a little bit easier because I actually gave distinct text translations for all the sound effects. And so you can, you know, you don't have to sort of map it out or whatever. The first time I played, all the times I played Myst for real, have to admit, I just guessed and checked the whole thing. I never actually figured out that the sounds meant anything, which is sort of embarrassing to admit. But I have made some things earlier. I didn't show the clock puzzle, but the clock puzzle definitely, I made it so you can see the hands while you're doing it. That's another one that used to always bug me when I was playing it. So there is a temptation when you're doing another game, you know, you're making it, you can make whatever you want, so you can fix things up. For the most part, they're the same though. Whoa. Not sure what happened there, but my machine just rebooted. I don't know if I hit something weird. Well, maybe that's done for the playthrough there. Do I have a dog or a cat? I actually do not, but we currently have 4 guinea pigs. I don't know if I have to go get and bring one in. They'd probably be grumpy if I went and grabbed one right now. But yeah, my family, we always have lots of guinea pigs. I can turn back video. Make sure I get the right camera here. So, okay, well, sounds good. Well, thanks for watching. I hope it was interesting. Yeah, feel free to try it out. And if you have any questions, you can email me, or you can do a web search. You'll find me with Apple II Myst. Let me know, and I'll be glad to hear anything. So thanks.